I'm AP Townley, and we're going to discuss 4 cantrips for the Warlock in D&D 5e. Ugh, back to 4. If you really like the 6 cantrips that a sorcerer gets, then prepare to be disappointed with the Warlock. Apparently, your Dark Patron is very stingy with their power. It only gives 4 cantrips in their career, only 2 to start with. This is especially brutal considering Warlocks don't get many spell slots either, even if they do come back on a short rest. Normally, with that little magic, you would rely heavily on your cantrips to see you through, but you only get a couple, so you better choose wisely. Of course, Warlocks get a few other things to bolster themselves, from their pact to their invocations, so it isn't all doom and gloom. But your cantrip choice really matters. So what kind of magic do we sell our souls for? Number 1, Eldritch Blast. Alright, let's get this one out of the way. Perhaps the strongest cantrip in 5e. Admittedly, I think it might be a little overrated, but we'll get to that in a moment. This is the workhorse of the Warlock, doing most of the heavy lifting in combat. This 0th level evocation spell takes an action to cast, has a range of 120 feet, and is available only to the Warlock. No other classes, no other subclasses, no races get this cantrip. The only other way to get this cantrip is through a feat. After succeeding at a ranged spell attack roll, the target takes 1d10 force damage. At higher levels, this cantrip scales in a very unusual manner. Most cantrips, at levels 5, 11, and 17, simply add another die of damage. For instance, Firebolt, at level 5, does 2d10 fire damage, or 3d10 at level 11. But Eldritch Blast does not work this way. When this cantrip scales, it adds more attacks, so at level 5, you fire 2 blasts of energy. Each attack requiring its own attack roll, and each doing 1d10 damage. You can target different enemies with those attacks, or the same, your choice. At level 11, you get 3 attacks, and 4 at level 17. I don't believe there's any other cantrip in 5e that scales like this. It makes the mathematical odds of landing an attack better, although the odds of landing all of your damage are slightly worse. So why is this cantrip so good and necessary for Warlocks? First is that Eldritch Blast does force damage. In most ways, this cantrip is comparable to something like Firebolt in the damage amount and range, but force damage is the least resisted damage type in all of D&D. I could probably count the number of creatures that have resistance to it on one hand and still have fingers left over. The other reason this cantrip is so favored is not so much the spell itself, but the abilities of the Warlock. Warlocks get special abilities called Eldritch Invocations. These invocations can improve your character in a variety of ways, but quite a few of them focus specifically on improving Eldritch Blast. Agonizing Blast allows you to add your Charisma modifier to each attack of Eldritch Blast, and remember, once you hit 5th level, you are making multiple attacks, and each attack would have you add your Charisma modifier to the damage. Repelling Blast allows you to push an enemy 10 feet away with Eldritch Blast, and there's a bunch more like this. Then there's the 1st level spell, Hex. Hex lets you add 1d6 damage to any attack you make, and that would include each attack of Eldritch Blast. All of this together makes Eldritch Blast a hard-hitting cantrip. But isn't it as amazing of a cantrip in a vacuum without the Warlock class as consideration? It's a good, solid, reliable cantrip. You can target multiple enemies or hit multiple times, which would potentially cause multiple concentration checks on enemies concentrating on spells. But it's the abilities of the Warlock and the Hex spell that make this cantrip amazing. Elsewise, I probably wouldn't go out of my way to take it with a feat or something. Number 2, Green Flame Blade. Now, unless you're playing a Hexblade-like character, I just don't recommend getting within melee range of your enemies with Warlock. But if you are playing a Hexblade-like character, or, more likely, you unwillingly find yourself within melee range of your enemies, this spell might come in handy. This evocation cantrip takes an action to cast, has a range of self with 5-foot radius, and does require a weapon of some kind, probably a dagger in this case. As part of casting the spell, you make a melee weapon attack. On a hit, you do weapon damage as normal, and flames will jump to another creature within 5 feet of the one you attack, doing fire damage equal to your spellcasting ability modifier. There's no saving throw or attack roll for this extra damage, so it could be a sneaky way to wound an otherwise heavily armored opponent by attacking their weaker subordinates. Remember, attacking within melee range of your enemies with something like Eldritch Blast would be at a disadvantage because it's a ranged attack roll. Having something melee oriented can protect you from those situations. And because Warlocks get so few spell slots, using something like Misty Step to get away from those melee combatants is very costly. Having a melee option can help you get out of those sticky situations. Like Eldritch Blast, this cantrip scales strangely too. At 5th level, your initial melee attack does an extra 1d8 fire damage, and the secondary target takes 1d8 plus your spellcasting modifier and fire damage. At levels 11 and 17, this damage increases by 1d8 each. Number 3, Infestation.
Oh, I have a parasite.
Does cursing your enemy with a plague of parasites sound like something a warlock would do? Yes, it does. There's a lot to be desired about this cantrip, and I wouldn't fault you for picking almost anything else. But hear me out on this one. There's a logic to my madness. This conjuration cantrip takes an action to cast and has a range of 30 feet. The target makes a con save. It takes 1d6 poison damage on a failed save. The damage increases at appropriate levels. So, short range, poison damage, which is one of the most resisted damage types, and a con save, which is one of the worst saving throws to target. This does not look promising, but just wait. This cantrip has a pretty unique secondary effect. Should the target fail its saving throw, they flail around trying to dislodge the parasites. They move 5 feet in a random direction determined by a d4 roll. 1 through 4 represents north, south, east, and west, respectively. It doesn't provoke attack of opportunity, but there is no caveat on the safety of the area they move into. As long as they can physically move there, they will regardless of the danger. They could stumble off a cliff, into a raging river, or right into that wall of fire your wizard set up. It even might get the target to move far enough away from you so you can escape. This is another way to deal with pesky enemies that get too close to you for you to use your Eldritch Blast. It's a spell that has a pretty unique effect. It's not taken too often either. Number 4, Blade Ward. Here's an interesting conundrum. If you had 1 round to prepare for battle, what would you do? A horde of orcs are about to knock down the keep's gate. Your party are about to burst into a thieves' guild hall. You have a round or so to prepare. So what do? In older editions, you would just start layering spells and potions on top of each other to buff up. The more time you had, the more power you could expend. But D&D 5e just doesn't work like that anymore. So my answer for the Warlock to that question is this abjuration cantrip that takes an action to cast, has a range of self, so you can only cast it on yourself and nobody else, and lasts for 1 round. And that means the spell lasts until the end of your next round. So it's not a spell to use necessarily in combat, but right before combat. And while the spell is active, you have resistance to bludgeoning, piercing, and slashing weapon damage. It is important to remember that it only applies to weapon damage, not damage created by spells. But for a spell that you can use at will and gives you the main ability of the Barbarian's Rage, it's not bad. And if you have a round to prepare, it's definitely worth using before you burst in to some bad guy's hideout and get riddled with arrows. So that's our list of 4 cantrips for the Warlock in D&D 5e. If you want more cantrip videos, then you're going to have to subscribe, ring the bell, smash that like button, leave your comments below. What cantrips would you take for your Warlock? The person who DMs for me played a Warlock in another friend's game and absolutely refused to take Eldritch Blast. Tell me your thoughts on that in the comments below, and I'll see you in the parlor.